That I think is complete. Now, a couple of things first. Please sign in at the entrance at some stage during the evening if you haven't done it already, so that we know in particular which members have attended, so we can be sure we've had a quorum. I hope we have. And this will be live streamed and made available to the public. So if you want to say anything you don't want the public to know, ask us to turn off the live stream before we say it. Now we have, the main presentation tonight will be Shane Rattenbury, our Climate Minister, presenting on the ACT Climate Strategy and the Living Infrastructure Plan. Now a couple of people here would like to make presentations, short presentations beforehand, not representing anybody in particular, but essentially representing ourselves. Now, here we go. I'm going to give myself 5 minutes to make this presentation on how Canberrans' emissions compare with the emissions of other people around the place. I have a few copies of a graph of per capita greenhouse emissions, which you can come up and collect if you're interested. Okay. All right, how do Canberrans' emissions compare? There are costs of reducing emissions and costs of failing to reduce emissions. A lot of people focus...
You need to speak up.
Okay. Reducing emissions will come at a cost. Failing to reduce emissions will also come at a cost. A lot of people focus on the first cost but not on the second. This is how the emissions will look under the ACT's climate strategy. Oh, hang on, it's got scrambled. I'll just continue and hope that this makes sense, even though... Okay, we have emissions targets. A target doesn't mean you're necessarily going to achieve anything in particular. Since 2004, we've had targets for walking, cycling and public transport. We've had cycling targets, which we came well short of. Walking targets, we also fell well short of the walking target. We've had a public transport target. We fell short of the public transport target. So having a target doesn't mean you're going to achieve it necessarily. Here's what the per capita greenhouse emissions were in the world in 1990, and I think we would just about all agree that that was more than is a safe amount of emissions for the climate. This is actually an earlier version. When it comes to being below average, countries like Bhutan, India and China are well below the average for that. Countries like the USA and Australia are well above the average. The ACT is right up there with them. Now, the ACT has three types of emissions. There's what's called Scope 1 emissions, which are the ones that we cause to happen within the ACT borders. Then there's Scope 2 emissions, which are essentially, from our point of view, emissions outside the ACT borders from generating the electricity that we use here. And then we have Scope 3 emissions, which are emissions that we cause in production of our food and our steel and our concrete and transport outside the ACT. And so they account for the rest of our emissions. Now, Australia has a target under a self-imposed target under the Paris Accord for 15 tonnes per person of greenhouse emissions. Now that's more than twice the average emissions in 1990. So if the rest of the world was to follow Australia's example, we would cook. The ACT's target for Scope 1 emissions is that amount, which is a pretty good achievement. For Scope 2 emissions, which is electricity, we've already got rid of that by our 100% renewable electricity target. But we haven't, if we assume that our Scope 3 emissions, which happen mostly in the rest of Australia, decline in line with the national target, that will bring us up to still above the 1990 average for world average for greenhouse emissions. Now, so who's entitled to cause above average emissions after 2019? Is it people who live in places with small populations like the ACT, just because you happen to live in a small population, or a small city in China perhaps? People who've already caused above average emissions. That well and truly includes people in Canberra. People who cause emissions outside their borders, are we supposed to be not responsible for them? Or is it just rich people? Because India and China aren't as rich as us, so we're entitled to cause more emissions. Now we have, because you're starting a bit late.
Thanks, Leon. Look, I'll be as brief as I can. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for the chance to come along and talk to you tonight about the ACT's new climate change strategy. I'm conscious some people in the room have seen this before, but plenty of people haven't. So I'm going to try and give you an overview.
Is this it?
That's it. Thank you, Leon.
Oh, good. Is this a PDF?
I'm not sure.
Oh, no, it's PowerPoint. Oh, yeah, it's PowerPoint.
There are two parts to this climate strategy. The first is... Thank you.
There's a pointer there. That's about all.
Oh, okay, that's fine.
It does.
There are two parts to the climate strategy. One is actually the climate strategy itself, which is about reducing emissions. The second is a document called Canberra's Living Infrastructure Plan, which I'll come back to later in the presentation. Combined, these two documents are designed to deliver the work we're going to do over the next 5 to 6 years through to 2025. As you saw on Leon's earlier slide, the government has legislated that we will be zero net emissions by 2045, and there are a series of interim targets along the way so that we can, I guess, hold ourselves to account and measure that we're actually making the progress we should make, rather than just leaving it to someone else's problem in 2040, that we actually need to do the work as we go along. So this document is about the next 5 or 6 years and getting us to a point where our emissions will be 50 to 60% below 1990 levels by that time. Sorry, I'll just come over here and self-navigate, that's okay.
Being on duty.
Often the sense of climate change is that it's someone else's problem, it happens in other places, but if anyone was here in January, will know that we had some pretty extraordinary heat waves in this city. And the temperature records were quite fascinating. We had an average temperature in January of 34.5 degrees, which is 6 degrees above our long-term average, and 4 degrees above any previous record. We had 4 days above 40 degrees Celsius. To give you some context, from about 1910, when temperature records were established in the ACT, through the mid-1990s, we had 9 days above 40 degrees.
That's in January?
No, overall, ever. 9. In 90 years, we had 9. Since then, we've had 16. So we went from one a decade to nearly one a year, just to give you a sense of the time frame. This past summer, we had 24 days above 35 degrees Celsius. Our long-term average is 6. So this summer was a taste of the sort of things that the climate scientists have been telling us is likely to be the ACT's future. Hotter and drier, and of course more extreme temperature events. Thanks, Leon. Are you happy to navigate for me?
Yeah.
That'd be great, thank you.
Right.
So as I said, there's the two documents. We'll skip straight along.
Yeah.
This is the ACT's emissions history. Now, I'm conscious of Leon's earlier presentation. Under the carbon accounting rules, the ACT government is required to report on Scope 1 and Scope 2. The Scope 3 emissions are an issue, and I'll come back to that later in the presentation. So, to Leon's earlier point, this is about Scope 1 and 2, which is what we have to report against under the national rules, and in fact the international rules. The black line is our historical emissions. You can see a dip there, which is when the carbon price came in 2012-13, and then when it got taken away, the emissions started to go up again. The red section is the effect of moving to 100% renewable electricity and eliminating our emissions from electricity generation. So that reduces our emissions by 40% below 1990 levels by 2020, which is the legislated target we have at the moment, and we will meet that. That puts us as one of the most advanced jurisdictions on the planet in terms of cutting those emissions. And then this band of lines you see here is our future forward strategies with that 2045 goal and the interim points along the way. Thanks, Leon. This graph is really interesting in telling you the story of what we need to get done. On the left-hand side, that is our emissions in 2012-13 before we started to move to renewable electricity. The big red section is our electricity emissions. The blue section is transport, and you can see the grey section is gas. The graph on the right-hand side is what our emissions profile will be next year. It's modelled, but what we best expect once we eliminate the electricity emissions. You can see transport becomes 62% of our emissions profile, gas is 22%, so between those two sectors alone, most of our emissions. Then you've got waste and industrial emissions, a few other things. So that is the challenge, and that's where the policy is very focused. These two sectors are hard. Let me tell you why. This 62%, because we're not a big industrial city, it's not lots of trucks and things driving around. It's us. 95% of that comes from private motor vehicle use. Us living our lives, going to work, going to school, going out on the weekend. And we live in a car-dominated city, so that is a really big challenge for us. On gas, for decades, we have been told in Canberra that gas is the cheap and clean alternative. And it is no longer either of those things. Gas is now simply another fossil fuel in our emissions profile, and of course anyone who's got gas connected will know it's not so cheap anymore. And so that is part of the discussion we want to start to have with the community about what the future of gas is and what we need to do about it in our emissions profile. Thanks, Leon. I'll skip straight through. Okay. I want to talk to you about just a couple of the key policy areas, and forgive me for whizzing along a bit, but bear with me. Transport, as I said, is a big challenge for us. There is no single solution to cutting those transport emissions. We are a city that is really car reliant, and so we need to think about what the alternatives are. This means we need to improve our walking and cycling infrastructure and make it easier for people. There are vast parts of this city at the moment that don't even have a footpath. There is no lighting, so people feel unsafe at night. We have the best cycling infrastructure in Australia, but compared to European cities that have 50% cycling rates, we are a long, long way behind. So that's the challenge in that space. We need to electrify the fleet. We need to continue to improve public transport. One of the initiatives is to have our bus fleet be zero emissions by 2040. Some people have said to me that seems a really long way away. But to put that in context, our buses last 15 or 20 years. So what it means is the buses we are buying within the 2 or 3 years need to be zero emission buses, so that when we get to 2040, we've got a full fleet of zero emission buses. So that's the challenge ahead of us. And we're probably just at the right time, because electric buses are starting to hit a point where they are affordable and reliable in a way that they weren't even 3 years ago. Thank you. I want to quickly talk about car-free days, because it's one of the things in the strategy. There are 98 actions in these two strategies, so I'm obviously not going to cover them all tonight. But the car-free days are one of those funny ones that I thought were a small bit of the strategy. They've had a lot of press. This is a shot from Paris, where they're done all over the world. Paris, Berlin, cities in South America. It involves shutting down some roads for part of a day to enable the public to reclaim the public realm and experience it differently, not in a car-dominated way. Most of you will recognise this shot from Paris. Some have suggested that the government's proposal for car-free days is about banning you from driving. I can assure you that is not the case. We will not be shutting down Northbourne Avenue at 8:30 on a Monday morning. This will be something like the Belconnen Town Centre might be closed on a Saturday, or parts of it, so that there can be a community festival. That's what a car-free day means, so I just wanted to clarify that. I've talked about cycling, so we'll skip straight through. The government also has a zero emission vehicle action plan. This came out about 12 or 18 months ago. In terms of getting to zero emission vehicles, bigger factors than us are going to determine this. Globally, car makers are saying they're going to stop building petrol cars. That's going to happen well beyond whatever the ACT does. But we need to be ready for that transition. So this strategy includes things like we will change the planning rules so that all new multi-unit developments have to put electric infrastructure in the basement when the building is built, because it's heaps cheaper to do it up front rather than retrofit it later. And so we want to put those sort of things in place that mean our city is ready for this transition that's coming. The government has a commitment to have our entire vehicle fleet 100% zero emission vehicles within 3 years. We can do this because our vehicles are on a 3-year leasing cycle, and as each vehicle now is coming out, we are replacing them with an electric vehicle. That's going really well already. The running costs are 80% lower for these electric vehicles than the petrol cars they're replacing. And so by moving to a 4-year lease cycle, which just changes the economics slightly, this is a cost-neutral policy for government to bring in these electric vehicles. What it will mean is those vehicles will come out of lease cycle in just a few years and be available for the rest of the community as a second-hand EV, so we start to make it easier for the community to access these vehicles. Look, energy, buildings and how we plan the city generally are going to have a big impact on our emissions profile. The buildings that are being built today will be standing in 2045 when we want to be zero emissions. So this is a big challenge to get the right policies in place fast enough to make that the case. We have changed the legislation so that the 100% renewable electricity target must be maintained in perpetuity. That's now in legislation. On gas, the policy is clear that we need to transition out of gas by 2045 at the latest, natural gas. The ACT is currently the only jurisdiction in Australia where it is mandatory that when a new suburb is built, the gas infrastructure must be rolled out. No one else does it. It's probably, again, a legacy of that history we have in this city of being really gas dependent. And so we will remove that requirement. We've already given an exemption for the suburb of Ginninderra who wanted to be an all-electric suburb. And they are showing how efficient it is to be an all-electric household. First of all, you cut out $200 or $300 a year of just connecting to the gas network. And those houses where they're putting in efficient electric devices, solar panels and electric cooktops, they estimate will save about $1,600 a year on their energy bills. Now they estimate it's $4,000 to $5,000 up front more expensive for a brand new house. But if you do the equation here, it only takes 3 or 4 years to pay off that difference, and then going forward you have all of those economic savings. The government's putting in place a lot of initiatives first, because I think it's right that we demonstrate these things and learn how to do them for the rest of the community to then work on. So you will see things such as the bus fleet that I talked about earlier. We've just built the first all-electric school in the suburb of Taylor, which is up in North Gungahlin. Previously, everyone assumed you had to put in a big gas heating and cooling system for large buildings. That's generally been the wisdom of how you do these things. We've demonstrated that through clever design and using some new technology, you can build an all-electric school. So that school now is a school that does not emit greenhouse gas emissions once we get to 100% renewable electricity, which I think is a really significant achievement. Trying to do similar things in the health space, that's a little bit harder. Our health officials are not quite there yet, but we're working on them. Thank you. We're also going to get, I talked earlier about having 100% zero emission vehicles in the government fleet. There's a little asterisk on that that says we're fit for purpose, because we don't want to send our rangers up to the top of the Magi National Park in an EV and then get marooned. So you've got to be practical about these things. But our Emergency Services Agency has taken up this challenge, and they've managed to track down a manufacturer in Europe who are building the first electric fire trucks. We are going to be the first jurisdiction in the Southern Hemisphere to receive one of these. And again, it just shows that when you set your mind, have the political will to make these commitments to these targets, opportunities arise. Our agencies are embedded in this strategy, and because of Canberra's reputation as being an ambitious jurisdiction, companies like Rosenbauer, who build these trucks, want to work with us. I think that's really good for Canberra. Thank you, Lenny.
Is that all?
No, a little bit more. Waste is a tricky sector. Just very quickly, we need to particularly deal with food waste in the ACT. As you know, you can only put the garden waste in your green bins. We need to get food waste in there as well, because when it breaks down, it emits methane, which is a very potent greenhouse gas. And so there's a clear commitment in the strategy to have a food and garden organics waste collection in place within a couple of years, both for households, and we also need to deal with the commercial sector. Big food courts, the convention centre, this sort of thing. The strategy is not set in stone. I mean, it is government policy, but it's really clear that where we're trying to get to, the emissions we have to cut now are the harder ones. We're getting into sectors that are harder to tackle, they require community behaviour change, and I have to stand here and hand on heart, I cannot say this strategy will deliver the emissions targets that we have. But what we think it does contain is all the right things that will get us on that track, and we need to be flexible as we go along to adopt new technologies, or if something doesn't work, come up with a new strategy to replace it. And so I think that's really important to be upfront about that, because we're trying to make sure the community understands what we're trying to do. This is where I get to Scope 3 emissions, which Leon spoke about earlier. They are not part of the strategy at the moment, but we know that as a wealthy city, Canberrans consume a lot compared to other places. And so we do have a bigger footprint. That's been well known for years. And so we are starting to explore what to do about Scope 3 emissions ahead of the pack. A little example of how we're doing this, I've just taken an initiative to the National Consumer Affairs Meeting to create a right to repair in Australian law. We've all got those devices that have built-in obsolescence. If you try to open them, they break, or there's no way to repair them, or if you don't go to the right shop, then your warranty gets expired. We want to change those rules, and that means things don't get thrown away, and all those embodied emissions, which can be really significant, don't get churned over as quickly. Look, a lot of these policy positions are the first time they're being done in Australia. The ACT will continue to lead the nation. This policy is widely recognised as being the most ambitious in Australia. I think that's something we can be proud of. It also means some of it will be hard, and some of it we'll have to sort of work on, and there will be some challenges as we go. But again, I think it's really important the government is clear about where we're trying to get to, so that the community can start to embrace that and understand it. Thank you. We'll skip through here. The just transition is a really important part of this strategy. This is the principle that says there's a lot of change embedded in this strategy, and we need to make sure it's as fair as possible for the whole community. There are two elements to that. One is for workers. Some workers' jobs will become obsolete. Right now, Action has a team of diesel mechanics. If we have zero-emission buses, they don't have a job anymore. And so we need to think about, that's one case study of what we need to do. The second element of the just transition is these policies will require changeovers, and that will cost in some areas. Now, we are seeking to do that as efficiently as possible. We particularly need to be mindful of our low-income communities, and you'll see right through the policy, there are a lot of initiatives on supporting low-income households, working on government housing and these sort of things. Thanks, Leon. One thing that I think is really important in this strategy, in that just transition sense, and I'm particularly committed to, is putting in place minimum energy performance standards for rental properties. At the moment, this is not a requirement. For too long in the ACT, people have lived in homes that are freezing cold in winter, boiling hot in summer. They have a lower quality of life and bigger energy bills. And we think it's only fair and just that there should be a minimum performance standard for a household. And that's basic things like wall and ceiling insulation and draft sealing. I think if you're going to rent a house out, you should provide that as a basic amenity. The market has not provided it, so government needs to step in and intervene and legislate that. Thank you. Just quickly on living infrastructure. That's the jargony word for green stuff. It's trees, grasses, green roofs and walls, even water bodies. These are all things that are living infrastructure. Thanks, Leon. The reason for that is the urban heat island effect. We all roughly know the concept. This is a study that the ACT government commissioned from the CSIRO to look at what it specifically means in Canberra. And the one case study I'll give out to you from it, as I'm in a hurry, is on the day that the CSIRO did the measurements. It was a hot day in Canberra. They took the temperature down by Lake Griffin, where there was trees, there was grass, there was the influence of water. It was 28.8 degrees. In Gungahlin, in a new suburb, where there were not many trees, lots more concrete, asphalt and paving, and all those sort of things, it was 41.1 degrees. That's 12 or 13 degree temperature difference, which is an extraordinary proposition and demonstrates the importance of living infrastructure and why it's such a specific thing as part of this climate strategy. Again, the living infrastructure plan has a few initiatives. Let me just touch on a couple. The first is a 30% canopy cover. That basically means getting enough shade across the city. Right now we have about 21% canopy cover. So it means roughly a 50% increase. This will require hundreds of thousands more trees to be planted in this city. hundreds of thousands over the next 20 years. So it's going to be a big deal. The other part is a 30% surface permeability target. You might describe this as plantable areas. At the moment, when someone builds a house or a new apartment building, what we want to do is create a set of rules that says at least 30% of the block must have room for planting trees and shrubs and lawn and surfaces that water can get through, so that you can have those greener, cooler influences. There's also a requirement to review the Tree Protection Act, because clearly, at the moment, research done by my colleague Caroline Lakuta shows that we are having a net loss of about 3,000 trees a year in this city at the moment. So clearly we're not getting it right, and we've got to make some changes. I also want to quickly talk about the Oasis program. This is the thinking behind this point is that we want to think about how do we make sure each suburb has somewhere cool to go. How do we create oases on hot days for people who can't afford air conditioning? Is it keeping the library open till 11 o'clock on nights where the temperature gets over 35 degrees, or days where the temperature gets over? Doesn't mean we have to make sure we plant a mini forest in each suburb so there's somewhere cool for people to go. These are the sort of ideas that are being thought about. These are just groovy pictures of living infrastructure, and thank you, Leon, my last skip through. My last slide is about the importance of community engagement in this strategy. Up until now, the cuts in emissions we've made and moving to 100% renewable electricity have been just done by government policy. You haven't really noticed any difference. You flick the switch, the power still comes out, it's all fine. There has been some increase in electricity bills, but our research shows that the community is comfortable with that, and through concessions we've been able to help the lower income people in the community. But as you can see from the sectors I talked about, to cut emissions further is going to require us to live our lives a bit differently. Now that's over a long-term time frame. We're not trying to ask people to completely turn their lives over overnight, but we do need to take the community on this journey and have people, we need the business community to be involved. We need community organisations to suggest projects and potentially lead projects. And so that's a really important part of this strategy. That is my super truncated version. Hopefully that's given you a feel for the strategy, and subject to the Chair's time limits, I'm happy to take some questions if there's room.
Yeah. All right, we have about 10 minutes for questions. Would anybody like to ask a question?
Yes, off the back.
Quick question, and I'll put it out there that I'm not trying to fall on, I'm a green member and I'm supporting a lot of the things, but you're talking about the transport and trying to push people for cycling and walking and things. I cycle everywhere, I walk everything, but on the other hand I've got a few cars as well because I like occasionally to drive them. But we all know that one of the ways to actually encourage people to actually walk or cycle is actually to start to think that they are the prime users rather than the cars. But with all the change to infrastructure here, they're still extending roads, and when you put the light rail, when we actually even talked to the Canberra Metro, whatever it was at the time, they said that they're not going to make sure that people, when they want to go and pressing the button to cross the road, they're going to get priority, which, as you know, in all over Europe and many other places around the Western world, that's what happened. Why doesn't that actually take place in the government?
Well, the bottom line truth is that we, in this city, most of our planners still do have the car as the dominant mode of transport. So this will not be an easy challenge. It will be not an overnight one. At the same time, cars will continue to be a part of this city for a long time to come. I think the way we need to think about this is we need to make it easier for people to do different things. I think e-bikes are a really important part of that story. For people who live more distance or a bit older, not as fit, e-bikes will open up new possibilities. I'd like to think we can create a system in the medium term where, at the moment most households have 2 or 3 cars. Plenty of households do. If we could improve the public transport so much and make walking and cycling more easy for people, such that each household only needs 1 car, that would be an enormous improvement for this city. That's kind of how I see the transition happening over time. Yes?
Re your electric fire trucks.
Yes.
How would they perform in the potential of a fire event where they may be called to be used for 24, 36 hours without, with just changing over crews, and then the truck heads straight back out again?
I'm assured by the Emergency Services Agency that they are comfortable with the performance of the vehicles, but it's something we'll have to monitor. These trucks do have a diesel backup in the back of them. They need the diesel to drive actually the hose pump, but it can also be used for the drivetrain, but the performance specs are that the electric drivetrain will be used for 95 to 98% of all requirements. So there is, because they're an emergency vehicle, there is that little, for the exact scenarios, the extreme scenarios that you speak
The
of.
extreme scenarios, but the
They can happen.
predictable scenarios now, as we see to our north.
They can happen, absolutely. Yes.
Hi Shane, you talked about community behaviour change and community leadership and community run projects. I was just wondering if you could give some examples of how the Greens or the ACT government are helping to overcome some of the bureaucratic hurdles that community groups encounter when they're trying to do good things in our community and run community-led projects.
Yeah, look, I get frustrated by some of that as well. You know, when I was the Minister for City Services, we did things like Lyman Commons and the City Farm and gave bits of land to people to do some of those projects, even the curtain shops. There was a community group there that wanted to fix the gardens, and the initial reaction was insurance won't let us do that. Anyway, we changed the insurance rules and fixed that. One of the other programs we're running is the Zero Emission Grants. This is a little program we've created to, I know there's lots of community groups with great ideas, but sometimes they just don't have the wherewithal, and so we're giving out these small-scale grants to community organisations to lead projects, so including Hackett Community Compost, but also, you know, we had a group in Woden who started a program where they were fixing up bicycles. They had troubled young people helping learn how to fix the bicycles, and they gave them to people as free transport. So those kind of projects, I think, help create some of those opportunities and break down some barriers, but it will be a constant battle, because that's the way the government works, unfortunately. Over here, yes, and then I'll...
I'm one of 50,000 people in Canberra with hearing loss. So I want to thank you for the way you project your voice. No, I mean it. It's really hard. I've got good hearing aids, but most people don't learn to project their voice. I live in an area with knockdown rebuilds, and I think you need more people with their eye on the ball in ACT planning, because around me we are getting 2-storey houses and people with disability won't be able to climb up the stairs. And I mean, I can take you where I live and I can show you how bad it is.
Yeah. Someone gave me a piece of data today, which I still have to check, but they suggested that the ACT is building the largest new houses in the country. And I would believe that based on the sort of examples we are seeing around town.
And very near me I have a house that for only 4 people, and there's nowhere to plant a tree.
Yes.
So you do need more people in ACT planning who are really on the ball.
Fair point. Yes.
I just want to make 2 comments about what I think is a bit of a disconnect in what's obviously a commendable strategy. I'm talking about the area which I live is near Reed Braddon. One of the developments that's going up along Ainsley Avenue, corner of Ainsley Avenue and Couillon Street, the developer told us that they were quite happy to keep the trees, but it was the ACT government that mandated their removal along Currawong Street and elsewhere. The second thing is, there's some work recently done at around Reed Oval. Speaking to Parks and Gardens people, they said they got the same staff establishment but double the area to look after. Now, how do you reconcile those sorts of things with the goals in this sort of strategy?
For me, this strategy is where we need to get to, and now we've got to get on and implement it. Now, what I can positively say is this strategy went through Cabinet and has been signed off by the whole government. This is not me as the Climate Minister, this is government policy. It went through Cabinet 9 times, which is unprecedented in my time in the ministry, because there's so much in it, and every agency of government has some responsibility to deliver this strategy. It's not just the Climate Agency, and so I hope, my intent is that by having had all the other ministers and all the agencies sign off on it, there's a degree of buy-in, but it will require ongoing pressure from me as the Climate Minister, as long as I hold that title. Certainly as long as I'm a Greens member of the Assembly, I'll be on their tail, but also, you know, community pressure. There's strong expectation in Canberra that we deliver on a policy like this, and so I think the community pressure will be an important part of the story. Right back.
Shane, one really hidden challenge is that the ACT is an island in a federal policy that completely ignores what we are talking about here. Do you see any chance, or do you have contacts with other states in Australia Australia that share the ACT's vision and
Yes, we do. Let me start with a quick anecdote. My favourite part of what this policy has delivered is, with the ACT being 100% renewable electricity, all the federal parliamentarians work in a building powered by 100% renewable electricity. So Matt Canavan has to go to work every day as in Canberra, and think about that. But yes, look, seriously, we are part of, for example, the City Powers Partnership, which has been put together by the Climate Council in Australia. About 130 councils across Australia are members of that, and we all work together to share ideas, and we have partnerships with things like that. So we certainly work with other jurisdictions where we can. I think an important part of what we are doing here in the ACT is that we are a small jurisdiction and we're a small part of Australia's emissions, but we are demonstrating what can be done. If you decide to go for it, and you're sensible and you think carefully about these policies, you can put them in place in a really cost-effective and time-effective way. So I think that's part of the contribution we're making to the national discussion.
So look, I broadly support the strategy, but I do think that there are some things that are a little bit misleading in it, because I think it's reasonable for the ACT. The ACT can have a 100% renewable strategy because, for electricity, for example, because we're basically account for 2 suburbs in the whole of Australia. Compared to big cities, it's a different question whether you can run the whole Australian grid of 100% renewables. So that question is kind of still out there. We can do it as a small part of Australia, but it's a different proposition as to whether the whole of Australia can do it. And also, if electric cars have kind of emerged and become low cost, then that's obviously a fantastic thing, and they can be sort of charged, but it's kind of reliant on technology. It's, I hope that they will emerge in the next 10 or 20 years, but it's possible that they kind of won't. And I think that's why you can shift some people to bicycles. I think it's unrealistic for 55-year-old men and women that might be dropping kids off at school and doing shopping on the way back to do it on a bicycle. I think we do probably have to be realistic about where the ACT fits in the whole of Australia, and I suppose into the whole of Australia's emissions. And kind of, secondly, while it's commendable for us to do a bit on this, I've got no sense that either the US, the Chinese or the Indians are taking climate change particularly seriously. And at some point, if they're not sort of taking it seriously, then if we're pushing up higher costs on ourselves, higher and higher costs on ourselves, then it probably, to me, doesn't actually make much sense to continue to do so.
A couple of quick thoughts on that.
Yeah.
Look, they're all interesting points. In terms of electric vehicles, most experts are predicting that within 3 or 4 years, we will see price parity between electric vehicles and petrol vehicles.
Yeah, well,
the prices are coming down that fast.
Well, that's great, but if that's the case, then we don't need to shift everyone to bicycles.
Well, no, because there are still issues of congestion, of obesity and the like. So there's multiple policy agendas here. I'm also not suggesting...
One more question after this.
I'm not suggesting everybody needs to ride a bicycle. What I am suggesting is we need to make sure that there are options for people. If you've got to drop one kid at one school, one kid at another school, and drive around for work all day, you're not going to do that by bicycle. But there are plenty of people who live 4 or 5 kilometres from work who could ride a bicycle, or get a bus if we get the bus network right. So it's about creating opportunities for people in even in different phases of life. You might ride to work 2 days a week because you don't have your responsibilities, but on the 3 days you do, you'd take the car. They're the sort of things we need to think about. Just quickly on the 100% thing, look, the ACT can do it because we are smaller and we have done it. No one else has done it. We're only the 8th jurisdiction in the world and the first outside Europe to do it. So we are getting on with it. It is clear that we need to make sure the Australian East Coast grid is set up, we're all part of it, to be capable of moving to 100% renewables. That means we need storage, we need batteries, we need pumped hydro, we need to build more interconnectors so that when it's blowing a gale in South Australia but it's cloudy in Queensland and not getting much solar, we can shift power across the country. I'm heading up tomorrow to Cardiff Energy Council. That's the conversation we'll be having with the Commonwealth Government, is we need to invest now in our grid so that it's ready for the future. Just quickly on the issue of should we do it when others are not, we have a moral responsibility to get stuck into this. Back to Leon's earlier point, we have historically put out way more emissions than a lot of other countries, and we've got wealthy doing that. We have a duty to lead, And frankly, the science is telling us we have to do this because the costs of not dealing with it are far greater. There was one, yes.
Just following on from that point about 100% renewable electricity. I assume that's on an annual basis. The amount of renewables we produce in a year equals the amount that we consume in a year.
Perfect description.
Yeah. I think the danger with presenting it the way that you have is that there's no more work that needs to be done in relation to electricity.
Can you speak up?
Sorry, I was just saying the danger, I think, in presenting it in the way that Shane has, that all our electricity is now renewable, suggests that there's no more work that needs to be done in relation to electricity. I think the next step after what hopefully we'll achieve next year is to move towards a point where we can achieve energy balance on a month-to-month basis, which means that basically we achieve a month-to-month balance during winter, because that's when the lion's share of our energy usage is. Now that's not that difficult to achieve. I think I've almost achieved it just in my home, covering about a third of my rooftop with solar panels. So with energy efficiency, with the cost of solar coming down, that probably would be able to be achieved in about 5 years' time. The next step after that, I think, will be then storage, as you've mentioned, and batteries, which the predictions are the costs are coming down quite dramatically over the next 5 years or so. And once you've got to that point where you're generating enough electricity over the winter months, renewable electricity over the winter months, and you have your storage, then at that point you can really claim, you can almost cut the cord to the fossil fuel powered stations and claim that we're completely on renewable electricity. And I don't think that's too far off. So long as the cost of batteries come down. In fact, at some point you won't even need an electricity grid at that point. So yeah, it's more of a comment than a question.
No, they're fair points. We've always been very clear about how the 100% is calculated. The ACT consumes this much electricity a year, and we've commissioned that much in renewable power plants. We've built a whole lot of new wind farms and solar farms to deliver it, so we've definitely increased the capacity. I did skip through a bit. Rest assured that in the climate strategy there is still a lot of stuff that's very focused on energy efficiency, because it's not an endless system. We still need to be careful, and that also goes a lot to costs, because if we can actually make people's homes more energy efficient, it keeps costs down and helps all those things as well. So I'll leave it there, Leon, because I can see you're getting itchy.
Thank you, Shane. I'm getting very, very itchy now. Thank you also to Andrea and to me if you want to, but I'm afraid I have to move on. Thanks Shane. It was great to have you. Right, now we have the reconvening of our 2018 general meeting. Is Bruce Smith here? Yep. He's hiding in the corner. Right, can you present the financial reports and auditors' reports for 2016-17 and 2017-18?
Sure. Do you want to bring up those?
Have you got them here?
So I'll be very brief. This is a kind of anomaly where we haven't been able to have the finalise our AGMs because of the problems with financial statements. There's been a number of reasons for that, to do with lack of invoices and auditors saying that it couldn't actually be auditable. So what we've done is make a big push, collect as many as we could. We've taken that to auditors who have done independent financial reports on each of the 3 years. So 16-17, 17-18, and of course the most recent year, which we'll do in the formal AGM, which is 18-19. So these are copies of the financial statements. If anyone wants to read them, they won't change your life. They're kind of pretty dry, but they're there and they're done. Basically, the story for 16-17 is that we started off with 26,000 in the account.
the ACT government wasn't too pleased with that because basically it had been mounting up and they wanted us to spend as much of that as possible in that financial year. What was spent was about 30,000 in that year. So a lot was put away. The expenditure was 12,000 on grants, mainly to the residents' associations, for things like parties at the shops, the O'Connor Christmas party, light up Lynham, things like that. For community campaigns around Coles Doma development, and also, of course, the election that year, where NCCC held a major forum at Lynham Primary. And we got new equipment, new computer, live streaming equipment, which you can see in operation today, and also funding things like the Dixon Traders for the work that was done around the Dixon Village. So there was a lot of that kind of thing in that year. Yeah. And then following year, 17-18, much lower level of expenditure for that year. It was in the realm of about 11,000 in that year. Similar sort of categories of expenditure. We had the Kellett Memorial in Dixon, the website maintenance, establishment of the Watson Community Association website, continuing campaign around Coles at the Dixon shops, things like that. So they were the major items of expenditure over that year and altogether over those 2 years. As I said, the auditors have had a look at it all. They've said, yep, there's still some missing invoices, but basically it all looks fine. The financial statements reflect the bank accounts. And so what I'd like to do is for this AGM to basically sign off and accept this the report of the auditors. And on that basis, we'll rule the line and move on into at least the last financial year.
All right, sorry, I can't display them.
And we also make a vote of thanks to yourself and to the document.
I'd also like to thank all the people like Jane and others who we had to hassle endlessly to get the invoices from about 3 years ago, which was very painful. But so thank you all for working on that.
I would like to second.
Second motion. Okay. Any other discussion? All those in favour? Those against? The motion is carried. Are you keeping the track of the minutes, Andrea? Excellent. Sorry, we're having a lot of trouble displaying things tonight. Right, now we close our 2018 annual general meeting and we open our 2019 annual general meeting. We've got attendance and apologies already covered. Confirm the minutes of the previous annual general meeting. Now, we can't really do that because the annual general meeting's just closed, so we'll have to type up the minutes and confirm them later. Have we got the statement of accounts for this year, Bruce? Bruce?
Sorry?
Have you presented this year's statement of accounts as well?
Sure. I can do this very quickly.
Okay.
So the expenditure for 18-19 was $12,618. Major items, we gave a whole lot of grants to, again, residents' associations to be doing things at the local level, the Dixon Heritage Walk, the production of the History of Hackett book that the Hackett Community Association did, the establishment costs for the Campbell Association, continuing with Coles Doma, but also funding things like the appeal in ACAT on the Soho development in Dixon and the appeal around Northbourne Oval. And then continuing insurance, room hire, website maintenance and so forth. So exciting, but the business as usual over that year.
Right.
Any questions about that?
Bruce, would you like to sign this report so that I can then hand it out? Now we've got that's our committee report, and I'll make. Oh yeah, it's up on the screen. But if anybody would like to collect it, I'll put copies out there. Basically, we had those people on the committee. John Lincoln was replaced by Bruce Smith during the year. Our activities. We resumed the practice of conducting general business at all general meetings, publishing minutes of general meetings. The committee can commence publication of minutes of committee meetings, and residents' associations were invited to report to general meetings. I think we were doing that before anyway. We know about the AGM. We funded various things, including a heritage walk in Dixon, activities by several of the local residents' associations. We suspended a member from the committee. Received a letter from the Director General of Environment and Planning, which didn't answer our questions. We had a number of presentations during the year, and we've had active working groups on Dixon Section 72, which is the area behind the swimming pool, and on the National Capital Plan Amendment 91, which was to do with Northbourne Avenue, and we focused in particular on the intersection of Northbourne and Wakefield and Macarthur Avenues, where quite high buildings are being allowed. We had one successful appeal against the approval of a particular development application, and we agreed to draft a new constitution. And I've only gone up to June of this year, and of course we now have that new constitution, and congratulations to Paul Costigan and all the others who put that together. Net profit and loss was, we started the year with a net surplus of $10,861, and we ended with a net surplus of $11,071. So the annual surplus was $210, so pretty much steady as she goes in terms of how much we had in the bank. That's our report, which has to go to the regulator. Now, next item, the election of chairperson, deputy chairperson, secretary. Yep.
Oh, hang on. Do we vote to accept it?
We don't. We can vote to accept it. Do we?
I'm not sure.
It won't hurt if we do.
It doesn't.
It doesn't hurt. All right.
So I move that.
You move it. Be accepted. Voltraud's moved. Any seconder?
Yep.
Marcus.
Marcus.
Marcus. Those in favour? Those against? Thank you. All right, that's ticked off, and we have to send it off to the regulator now. Now, the elections. We need a chairperson. Is there anybody in the room who would be prepared to nominate to be a chairperson, or would like to nominate anybody else as a chairperson? If not, I would like to nominate Marianne Aubrey-Collis, because she will be on the committee anyway, and if she would be an excellent chair, I think, and she could delegate all the work to other people, so she wouldn't have to overstrain herself.
That is a very, very kind offer, and I'm honoured, but I really do not think that I am in a situation at this stage to accept.
Okay.
But thank you for your vote of confidence in me, Leon. I think there could be someone else in the room who may be in a better position to take up the chair's position.
Is there anybody who... Jochen?
I nominate.
You nominate? I'll second the nomination. All right. Any other nominations for chair? In that case, you're elected, Jochen. Thank you. And for those of you who don't know, Jochen has previously been a chair of this council, and I think did a great job. Right, we have a chairperson now. Any nominations for deputy chair? Yeah?
Me.
You? Okay. Anybody like to second that?
Yes,
Jeff?
again.
Any other nominations? Going once? Going twice? Going 3 times? You're elected, Andrea.
Thank you.
Congratulations. Secretary. Now this is a job that entails a bit of work. Is that Chris?
Yeah.
You're nominating to be secretary?
Yeah.
Any seconders for that?
I'll second that, yes.
Oh, plenty of people. All right. Now, just before you go, is there anybody else who'd like to be secretary?
Could we take people's names?
Oh, sorry.
Because I'm meant to be
Yeah.
reporting back to the
Okay,
Parliament.
yeah, you
I
want-
need to know the
Okay.
names.
Now, the chair is Jochen Zeil, Z-E-I-L.
Sorry?
Jochen Zeil, Z-E-I-L.
J-O-C.
This deputy chair is, I haven't got a
Okay, that
pen,
makes sense.
is Andrea Madon.
M-A-D-O-N.
Yep. The secretary is Chris Finnegan. Now, we need a treasurer. Bruce. Are you prepared to stay on as treasurer?
Please, please.
Would anybody like to second that? Yes. Would anybody else like to nominate to be treasurer? Well, congratulations, Bruce Smith. And media coordinator. That sounds like a fun job. Would anybody like to nominate to be the media coordinator?
Just really briefly what the tasks are of the media.
I'll have to look for the Constitution, which will take me a minute or two. Now, where is... what the hell is going on here?
Okay, it's
Manage and moderate content of the Council's website
Good.
and other online formats within the framework of any digital communication policies and procedures agreed by each committee. And if the webmaster and related digital functions are outsourced to a skilled practitioner contractor, the media coordinator retains the exclusive role of being the committee member to approve the online content. So
All right.
it's really just getting the council's website as a communication.
Now, there is one person in this room whose media skills go into things like being able to live stream meetings, which I don't think anybody else has managed to do who's in this room. So, would Marcus like to be the media coordinator?
Okay.
Fantastic. I'll nominate you. Voltrad seconds you. Any other nominees? Congratulations. Marcus Hipkins. Marcus Hipkins is the name. Now, appointments of Residents Association members. Where did I put this? Here we are. Right, we have from the Campbell Community Association, Margaret Henderson and Margaret Dudley. So they are the two representatives for Campbell. From the Dixon Residents, oh, yep, all right.
Can people put up their hands?
Yep, great.
Wonderful,
Yep.
thank you.
Dixon Residents Group is nominating 3 people to fill 2 positions, so there'll never be more than 2 of them at one time. Those 3 people are Jane Goffman, Peter Callan and Bruce Pink. Hands up please. Thank you. Hackett Community Association, Voltrad Pix and Bruce Smith are... Now Bruce might... You're allowed to nominate another one because Bruce is already the treasurer, so you're allowed to nominate another person now. Reed Residents Association, Marianne Elbury-Collis and John Tucker. There's John, Marianne's over there. Thank you. And we're still hoping to get nominations. Yeah.
Watson Community Association.
Yeah, who's that?
That's me, Simon Clark. I've only managed to persuade myself to do it so far. I'm working on a few others.
Fantastic. All right. So now we have... another one?
No. Yeah.
Oh, sorry?
Yeah, I think I've been nominated by the Downer Community Association.
All right. What was your name?
Jeff Francis.
Jeff Francis.
That's for Downer?
For Downer, yeah. Fantastic. Yeah?
I'm representing, we've got nominated 2 people from Lynham.
Yeah?
I believe they contacted you, their names are Angela Reimer
Right. Yeah.
and Gordon McAllister.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, it looks like we have a very good committee this year. Thank you to all the people who have been nominated. Oh, we got more?
No. Is anyone from Bradford nominated?
No, we haven't come to that yet.
We have.
Braddon doesn't have an association. That's the next item on the agenda.
Technically, Dixon doesn't have an association either.
Dixon has the Dixon Residents Group, which is recognised in the Constitution. Yeah. Okay, all right, so we have, right, now there's an election of ordinary committee members nominated from suburbs without residents association. Do we have anybody here from Acton or who would like to nominate somebody from Acton? Anybody from Ainslie? Marcus is already on the committee, so it can be somebody else from Ainslie. Anybody from Ainslie you'd like? All right. Braddon, Jeff Davidson, fantastic. Anyone else from Braddon? How are we going? Civic? No. And Russell, I don't think any people live in Russell. They work there, but no, hardly anybody lives there. So, I'll just thank you. Pardon? Turner. Oh, Turner Residents Association, I don't think has nominated anybody, but if they do, they can come onto the committee. And O'Connor doesn't seem to have nominated yet.
And Pieligo.
Pieligo, no, you're right. They haven't nominated anybody yet. Since they only have about 170 residents, I'm not sure they have many people who have the time to drive all the way from Pieligo to here once a month for a meeting. And they also represent us in the Community Aviation Consultation Group, which saves us a lot of trouble. All right, Andrea, there's the list of the new committee. Okay, I hope I'm not going too far behind time. Appoint a reviewer, this is for our financial statements, and determine his or her remuneration, if any. Jochen?
Graham Lindner has agreed to do that next year.
Okay, has he set a price yet?
No, but that was $250 or something.
Yeah.
Or less.
Okay. Yeah. Any questions? No. I'm prepared to second that. Anybody else want to nominate a reviewer? Okay, those in favour of Graham Lindner? Those against? Fantastic. Determine the remuneration of servants, if any, of the council. We're all unpaid servants of the council, so bad luck if you wanted any money from us. And now we come to our November general meeting.
So is that AGM finished?
That's the AGM finished. We've concluded 2 AGMs in 1 day. Yes, Marianne.
Leon, at some stage or other, I think you're going to vacate that chair, and I would just like to ask the meeting to forward a vote of confidence for you steering through a rather sticky period in the NCCC. Could you, anybody second that motion point? Thank you.
Now, before we vote on that, I have to say that it's been difficult, and I have made some mistakes, and I apologise to the people who've been affected by those mistakes. Okay, now you can... Right, how are we going? Okay, we're ahead of time, doing really well.
No, are you changing over to the other chair, the new chair?
Past form would suggest that you hold the chair until the end.
Yeah, I think that's what the Constitution says. And we, all right, yeah.
Excuse me, Leon, could we just have a 5-minute stretch break?
Okay, yep, I could use it myself. All right, does somebody want to lead us in some stretches?
Don't go away.
Oh. Now there are some mugs over there, but I'm not sure.
Canberra development. And on the Thursday, 5th of December, we're holding another community meeting at Canberra where we'll present the revised master plan, which reflects the changes of the corridor framework process that has gone on this year. So just a heads up, it starts at 6 for 6:30, so if anyone wants to come along, please do. There'll be some refreshments. And if not, I'll probably do another presentation sometime next year, early next year anyway, about the project and where we're heading. And that was it.
And I can commend the refreshments to you.
How long will the presentation go for? Because I know you're starting, 6:30 is the start, but will we be out by 8?
Oh, easy. Yeah.
All right.
Yes.
Now, could I invite all of the committee members who are able to stay after this meeting and have their first meeting, which doesn't need to do anything more than to decide when their next meeting is going to be. Because I realised that we were planning to have a committee meeting before this, but I don't think it happened because I was rushing around doing other things and then time got away from us. So we still have acceptance of minutes of the June and October general meetings. They have been emailed to you. Yep.
Just on the October general meeting, I'm put down as from Dixon Residents Association. It's actually Watson.
Watson.
All right.
Which is why I was talking about Watson.
All right. Have you got that, Andrea?
What's your name again?
Simon Clark.
Thank you.
Yep. So that's an amendment. Any other? No, this is for the October general meetings.
And I've sent through some edits, but I wasn't actually at the meeting.
That was the Dixon Residents Report, which would have, is that right? Oh, no, the section.
No, I received the draft minutes, and there are lots of typos.
Yeah, but there was, all right. Yeah, well, typos were to be fixed, and hopefully we can recognise those. And was there a report from one of the reports that you gave a correction to?
There was some information about third-party appeal rights, which wasn't correct, so I thought it was important that that be corrected.
Okay, so perhaps you can send an email direct to Andrea just to so she can put those changes in.
I thought I had the read, but
I'm not quite sure which one we're referring to.
yeah, sorry. I do remember I did write them in, but
yes, I think what we said was probably not right.
No. I think I got your corrections, and I thought I put them in, but I might have been mistaken. I thought I had made that.
Yeah. All right. Now, do we have somebody to move that we accept the October general meeting minutes with those changes?
Yes, I'll move that we accept them with the changes.
Seconder?
Yes.
Okay, those in favour? Those against? Motion carried, thank you. Now we have to go back to the July general meeting minutes. I'll see if I can bring them up. They were circulated. It's just that somehow we forgot to approve them. Oh, sorry, the June general minutes. June. Sorry, wrong meeting. The June general meeting. Now, is that?
Leon, we approved them.
Did we? When?
Yeah, no, we approved them now.
Oh, we approved. All right. Are you happy to approve them? I hope somebody's read them. All right. Do we have a seconder?
Jeff was the second.
Yep. Jeff seconds. Those in favour? All right. Those against? That motion's carried. Now we can put them up on the web. Bruce, we're calling on you again to give the Treasurer's report for this year.
This is my third and last time. So account balance $6,028.17. There's been not much expenditure in the last month, funding Jeff's appeal on the Dixon Towers.
No, on the motor registry side.
Motor registry side,
I put one in today for Dixon Towers.
There's so many appeals.
Unfortunately.
Fortunately. So really in bits and pieces apart from that. The main thing is that we've applied for and expect to get this year's grant coming in the next few weeks, which is an additional $12,800 or so. What that means is that we're going to need an expenditure plan once we get that, of how we plan to actually use that money in this financial year. So what we'll be doing is working with the new committee and really going back to the bids that were made a few months ago, which we called for, and looking at updating and confirming those bids, and then really trying to get a fairly specific expenditure plan in place for the next few months. So that's really the next stage in terms of money.
Thank you, Bruce.
Any questions?
Would anybody like to move that we...
Oh, sorry, no.
Sorry, yeah, any questions? Would anybody like to move that we accept that report? Altroud moves. Marianne, bad luck Jeff, you missed out this time. Marianne seconds. Those in favour? Right, those against? Thank you. We have had some correspondence about the. Have I got this? You might be able to bring this up.
It's not for the technique.
Here we go. Yeah, we've had some correspondence, if you can read it there, about the cancellation of the Environment and Planning Forum. There's been some toing and froing. The upshot is that we'll be likely to meet with the Minister on the 10th or 12th of December, and there is a workshop on the new format of the Environment and Planning Forum scheduled for next week, I believe, about the 27th. So at least things are happening with the replacement of it. Now, whoops. Where are we? All right, we have a motion about the future of the civic pool, which seems to have been overtaken a bit by events with the effective announcement that the stadium is not currently on the agenda. But we can still consider the motion. It comes in essentially three parts. The North Canberra Community Council rests A, urgent repair and maintenance for Canberra Olympic Pool to augment Canberrans' health and well-being. We could also add, this should be based on an independent engineering report assessing plant performance and water leakage. The second part is that the Canberra Olympic Pool complex be kept in its current position, providing an exemplary exercise facility available to both city workers and the projected increase in city high-rise apartment dwellers. What I propose to do is just vote on each of those separately. So, do we have a nominator for the first one, urgent repair? Anybody wish to move this? Move it, that's right, not nominate. Marianne and Andre, would you like to second it? Okay, any discussion? Those in favour? Those against? Motion carried. Second part, that this should be based on an independent engineering report assessing plant performance and water leakage. Anybody wish to move that?
I'm sorry, I don't quite understand what that...
That's part of one.
Yes, it's an add-on to one. Do we want to add that into one or not?
Leon, can I say that I came to a meeting here about 2 months ago when Malcolm Snow, when I asked about the civic pool, said it leaks.
Yeah.
And then said...
Has done for years. Has done for years.
Yeah.
Yes, but I've spoken to a local pool manager who's repaired civic pool, and he says the only way you'll know how much it leaks is by asking Actu.
Actually, we've provided that information and the government knows how much it leaks. I don't know how many million litres it is, but it's horrendous. It's horrendous.
But are you really sure? Because this is a very experienced pool manager I've spoken to.
Yeah.
I used to work, one of my early jobs was housing and construction. It was one of my early projects, was a civic pool. Not as a professional, but I was on the team. And even then, they were looking for the leaks and trying to fix the leaks.
I'm sorry, I find it hard to read that. I'm willing to be on the subcommittee. I think you need to keep the pool and then we get a new pool right beside it. Because there's nothing to compare with swimming for exercise.
Oh, absolutely. But the problem is, at the time the pool was built, all of Canberra was being built, and there was a great shortage of concrete. And so they skimped on the concrete and they were building the pool, so it's just crap. Really, it's the only real best thing to do is to just demolish the whole thing and rebuild it.
Well, all right. Can we get back to this particular motion? Do we want to include that optional set of wording? Would anybody like to move it?
I don't think
no, you don't think we need that? All right, so nobody's moving that. Second part of the motion, that the complex be kept in its current position, blah, blah, blah. Would anybody like to move that part of the motion?
I'll move it.
Jeff moves it. Seconded, Marianne. All right, any more discussion? Those in favour? Those against? All right, we have parts 1 and 2 approved and the optional part not approved. Moving on. How do I do this? Do we have a report? Oh, no. Committee decisions. You should have had a report on committee decisions circulated recently with the agenda papers. And there haven't been any new committee decisions tonight. So if you look back through your emails, you should be able to find that. If you're not a member, if you haven't been a member yet, you can always ask us and we'll give you a copy. Combined Community Councils meeting, 2nd of November. Did I circulate? I think I circulated an item on that. Well, I will undertake to ensure that you get a report on the Combined Community Councils. ACT Plan and Review Working Group. I'm supposed to be the convener of that working group, and I tried to convene a meeting about a month ago and it didn't happen. We still haven't actually met, but we have exchanged some ideas, and now that I don't have so much work to do on the committee, I have no excuse for not convening a meeting. Residents Association reports. I think we've had some that have been circulated. Have you got a quick report, Jane?
I've got 3 or 4 things. We've skipped the working group, so I might as well mention. In the record of the October minutes, I wasn't at the October meeting, so I'll just give a quick report. We sat down, that's Dennis, myself, and I'm trying to remember who else was with us.
So is this the Section 72 working group?
No, this is the Northbourne Mackay.
All right, good, yeah.
And we sat down with the NCA. That was Andrew Smith and his Osada and Rebecca Sorensen. Sorry, I'm sorry to mix names up. Too many Rebeccas later. What was really disappointing was that the Chief Planner, Andrew Smith, gave us his assurance that they would do the modelling, and it was only 5 days later, I believe, that the NCA, the board met and issued a report, basically completely ignoring and dismissing what we had gone there and shown. So they clearly hadn't done modelling, which I think is outrageous. And as a result, we now have in the amended National Capital Plan a set of height controls that apply to that intersection that do, in fact, destroy the Griffin access along Majura Avenue and David Street, that makes it possible to actually see Black Mountain at the end of that access. if in fact a building is built on the ABC site to the heights that are now permissible. And yes, I mean, the reality is that that came at a time that many other things were happening with Section 72, so I really haven't done anything further. And to be honest, I'm disgusted. So, having put that much work into actually doing the modelling and talking to the NCA and believing that they would take it seriously.
Okay, any motions coming out of that yet?
No,
or are you
that's a report.
thinking about it? Okay.
The two things,
Sorry.
three things
Oh,
I'm
sorry.
going to do for Dixon Residents Group. To let you know, Saturday the 30th of November, the ACT Library Service is marking the 50th anniversary of Dixon Library, and I'll be giving the National Trust Heritage Walking Tour. We're doing it for free, and please be there by 10:15. I'm only doing this once, and it'll take probably about 45 minutes. So I'll be madly cramming the Conservation Management Plan for the third time between now and then. And so that's Saturday the 30th of November. Then the second thing is I gave a talk as National Trust to the Heritage of the Air conference this weekend. There was an ICOMOS, International Council of Monuments and Sites conference held in Canberra. It was a 4-day conference. The talk was about Canberra's original aerodrome and first air crash to a very large audience of aviation history buffs and Royal Australian Air Force personnel. And National Trust has agreed to prepare a nomination for heritage listing of that original aerodrome and landing ground. So that work is now underway. That's the second thing. The third thing is draft variation 367, which you may know as the spot rezoning of the Common Ground site, Block 25, Section 72. So a lot of work has been done now on this. And you may have seen the article in the paper and other things that are going on around that. As an outcome of that, Bruce and I sat down with the head of flood mapping and their contractor this morning, and now have a very much better understanding of the deficiencies of the current flood maps. So I haven't decided yet whether I will reinstate my FOI, but I do understand that the current flood maps omit all of the overland flows which would have been incorporated, it appears, in other earlier flood maps. Overland flows, of course, include when your gutter fails because the stormwater system has backed up, because the velocity through that channel is too high for any water to actually be able to get out. And therefore you have flooding in people's back gardens, on the streets, etc., which are not shown in the current flood maps. Okay? That's important. The second thing is that they're going to be doing a floodplain management study starting in the middle of next year. They'll be doing a peer review of the current flood maps, probably starting at the end of this year. So clearly, it's not as if we have a product that we have absolute confidence in, and we have very serious concerns about the suitability of Block 25 for vulnerable community housing tenants, especially when there is another block only 150 metres away that is now available because the CFMEU's headquarters were demolished and that block was decontaminated, unlike this block, which still, according to the EPA report, has asbestos buried in it. And therefore the works that are taking place and took place today, the soil sampling, those contractors should be warned that they're using a giant excavator. There's dust going everywhere. They have no masks on. And of course, the childcare centres that also lie very close to this could well be impacted. Okay, that's the end of me.
Thanks, Jane. Okay.
Before we move on, Jane, would it be through the
Would it be worthwhile going to the board of the NCA and raising the whole issue directly with them?
It may well
Because
be.
it's so important.
It is so important, you're right. And the reality is that I'm looking to the 1st of December as my recovery period, because this has been a terribly hard year.
Yes, but I'm wondering if this council could write, and just reflecting and saying tonight.
Yeah, that would need somebody to draft a letter for us. Jane's probably the ideal person to draft a letter, if she's got time.
To draft a letter to the board of the NCA, I expect would probably take me close to 6 hours.
Okay.
But
All right.
yes, I can put something.
Now, there was a report from the Section 72 working group circulated before the meeting, so unless somebody's got any new issues to raise, we'll move on. Now, there's one bit of correspondence that I forgot to mention, and that is we've been given a complimentary copy of this book, The National Capital in the National Interest by Rosemary Willett. And so I've written inside, please return to North Canberra Community Council, and given our address. So if anybody would like to borrow it, feel free to come and have a look and borrow it, and pass it on to somebody else when you're finished with it. I'll leave it over here. Residents associations. Any more residents associations to report? Read.
Just a quick one. I think I've already said that we've had our 75th anniversary of the continuing association, so I'll leave that, but that was fantastic. We had Dr. David Heaton telling us about George Houston Reed. What an amazing man, both in terms of intellect, wit, as well as space. The shipping container has finally been moved off Reed Oval, which we have been battling against to have it removed. It's not right off the oval, it's been moved to the side, and that has taken 7 years, I think. But it should never have been put there in the first place on the heritage part.
Big question, what is the
shipping container?
What is inside?
The shipping container, apparently must have been Lady Bountiful deposited them on just about every oval in Canberra, and they were ostensibly to store things like cricket gear, footies and things like that. However, it was totally inappropriate to be on a heritage oval. And one of the interesting things in terms of residents getting together to fight, unfortunately not through a DA process, but rather a certifying process, the possibility of a very, very unpleasant looking building on 23 Dirwin Gardens, vacant spot where there was a Mr. Fluffy. The people who are the owners of that have now decided to put it up for sale, big tick, and I was very pleased this afternoon to have a person call me who is interested in buying it but wants to start with the residents to talk about putting something on there that will bring harmony to that particular very vexatious little spot in Reed. Nothing like group action, and I'm really delighted. I'm about to give you've got the first good news. I'll be telling other people later on in the Reed group itself.
Now, does anybody else have any business to raise? Yes, Dennis.
Not quite a residence thing, but the City Renewal Authority has authorised the allocation of grants to work in the Dixon business area, so the area bounded by Cowper Street on the east, the drain on the south, Chalice Street on the west, and Handel Street on the north. So that area. So there are grants of up to $10,000. I don't know exactly how many. Grant submissions close on the 11th of December, and look at on the CRA side. If you know anybody who actually works in Dixon but has a brilliant idea of something to do there, tell them fast and tell them to get an application into the CRA to do something, which may be markets at Dixon, it may be a children's playground in an area or any other sorts of things.
Can I just say, I mean, I really appreciate that the grants, you know, are being advertised, but it's such a hard time of year for
Oh,
people.
accept that.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, you know, come on. You're talking about a quanga, you know.
Yeah.
They do things like this.
Still not good enough.
Whether it's good enough, it's what they do. Yeah.
Who is state?
Okay.
Dennis, who is state?
City renewal.
City.
Okay, any other business, anything I've forgotten? Joachim?
Just say something about where from here. We have a new constitution, and I think it allows us to involve resident associations much more deeply in NCCC affairs, and also feedback the opportunities we have with NCCC, including funding into the resident associations. So the idea is put forward by Paul Costigan, whom I actually really appreciate for having done that transformation of NCCC, is to have committee meetings with residents, the members of the ordinary members of NCCC. They are open to public, so you'll all be invited, but these are businesses like our general meeting we had today, but now involving the enlarged NCCC committee. And then in alternate months to have meetings with presentations and hopefully with good time for discussion, because that was always a bit of squeeze. Like today, we could have discussed much longer with Shane, and we will be able to do that with the new scheme. So I suggest that our next meeting and the first meeting of the enlarged committee will be in February. I'll be calling on the officers of the committee. Maybe we should meet in December briefly to talk about admin business and so on. And then we get into that rhythm of alternate meetings next year.
Can I also ask that we consider doing a real strategy meeting?
Yeah.
Because we have a lot of work
Yeah.
ahead of us.
Yeah. And we are volunteers.
Yes, exactly.
And we need to take care of ourselves, not to get too deep involved. Yeah. Thanks.
Right.
Leon, thanks.
So
You're
much.
free.
May I close the meeting?
Oh, can I get
Oh, we got Sue?
I just have one suggestion.
Yep.
I've noticed that a number of community councils are making submissions to the ACT government ahead of the next budget, saying what they want, their issues, the priorities, etc. And I'd just like to suggest that the new committee considers doing the same. I don't know whether NCCC has ever done it before.
How much time do we have?
Just to jump in, the deadline has passed.
Yeah.
So that's not the council ideas forward, but just in terms of making a decision about whether you want to make a submission, the deadline for submissions is
Alright,
closed.
so
I'm pretty
it's
sure.
something.
I thought
I
it
think
was
so.
early December, but yeah, right.
I'm pretty sure that some of the other
So we have a
organisations
running
are.
group for next year to prepare
Yeah,
budgets.
it's something to think about for next year.
So where is the committee meeting? Is it possible to meet here? Is that?
Yeah, no, that's what the officers of NCCC committee will organise.
Yeah. Yeah, and our webmaster is jumping up and down saying, when are you going to hold next year's meeting so I can put the dates and locations on the website? And he'll just have to wait until the new committee decides. Are we finished?
No, I'm sorry. There's just one quick thing in the absence of somebody here from Campbell. We had a meeting, three of us, including a Campbell resident, with the NCA, Sally Barnes and Andrew Smith, about the DOMA proposal to put on the Clonmel CSIRO block, Campbell 38. What we were particularly concerned about, apart from the fact that it's a very unsatisfactory proposal, and not particularly attractive to boot, is the fact that they ignored the major thrust of all the submissions. So we wanted to say we were very, very disappointed that if this was a genuine consultation process, that it seemed to be far from fit for purpose, because only 5% of the people who wrote to them quite liked it, 95% didn't, and made very sensible suggestions, none of which have been accepted, not one. So, and I'm very sad to see such a magnificent site go. It will be clear-felled, so when you're going past Canberra High School, look up to the right, depending which way you're going north, look up to the right and you'll see this beautiful, beautiful block of land that could be an inspirational development, and instead it's very, very, I'm sorry, we did our best.
And there's going to be 2 8-storey buildings right on Limestone Avenue. And Sally Barnes and Andrew Smith think that's totally appropriate. Did I like it? Sally Barnes asked.
Sadly.
What do you do?
We tried our best.
92 people responded. 31 written submissions that went on for pages. Not one single change in the DCP or in the proposed concept plan. It makes a mockery of any community consultation.
But it's not
Even the board was surprised. They said to Sally Barnes, didn't you make one change? No, because the developers have the right to do what they want to do on the land that they have bought, including making it a gated community. And on it goes.
This is a common theme that we will need to pick this up.
It's truly shocking.
Okay.
I mean,
I was just going to say that's
what
very
the government
exactly the DCA's experiencing kind of engaging with the plans along sort of Northern Avenue or down and Dixon. Sorry, down has been sort of rezoned to sort of medium density. So
usually if there is something that people don't like about a development, you can track it down to a breach of the planning regulations. If a development is genuinely bad and it's allowed by the planning regulations, then we need to change the planning regulations. And these are issues that we hope to be able to at least look at in our submission on the review of ACT planning.
Yes.
Leon, can I ask a question? I mean, I'm not so much in all this planning, but I have sometimes, I do not know, is there a legal requirement for the government to consult? And I mean, all what I have experienced in terms of consultation, the presentation, the sort of information, but no consultation. So what is the legal status of that? Is there anything, does the government, if they are, I mean, quite often like in Watson and so, the government is the proponent of development. Is there a legal requirement to consult before something is going ahead? Is that part of the whole process?
Yeah, there are requirements for certain development applications to consult before the development application is submitted, and about 4 years ago we asked the Planning Minister to ask the Planning Authority to specify what those requirements would be, and in about the last year they've done that, and so now there are very clear rules about pre-DA consultation for the big developments that qualify for it. With other developments, I'm not sure what the rules are. I believe, Carolyn Lakuta told me, Jane, that back about 2012 the Greens succeeded in getting some requirements for consultation agreed to. Can you remember what they were?
Not that I feel confident terribly.
Yeah.
I don't know if people Australia know. So.
Wasn't that the pre-DA consultation?
Yes.
Was it?
The NCA has a commitment to consultation. It's loud and clear on their website. They make much of it. But how it happens. in reality, it means nothing. They call the meetings, they have you for coffee, we talk a lot, and we're all best friends.
That's the standard thing. You can have a commitment to consultation, you don't have to listen to anything.
Yeah, that's
no,
right.
they actually say that, even with their design review panel. And there were 2 reports done by the design review panel. All their recommendations were ignored, except a little bit about native planting or something.
Yeah.
But they said that they're only a review panel, the NCA has the final say.
Yeah. I think there are...
There is so much time of community members going in this so-called consultation, and you have the feeling that this is not a serious consultation. It is sort of like sort of tick off, we were giving a presentation and that's it. And there's so much community attrition with this.
Yeah.
I do not know whether that can continue, particularly at the moment in North Country, there's so much going on.
Well, I can say that there are some developers, and I think I'm nominating you here, who consult with people and take on board the suggestions, at least some of them, and there are some developers who don't. But if the rule says you have to consult, that doesn't mean you have to take on board anything. But there are also lots of planning rules, and they are not supposed to be optional. And we have found cases more often than we'd like to, where developments have been approved even though they actually breached the regulations, and we've had to appeal against them. And it would be much easier for us if there was better checking of these development applications before they were approved.
Can I make a very simple comment? You pointed to someone just here who has been guilty of first grade consultation. And as a result of that first grade consultation, I'm not quite sure how I can politely put this, got kicked in the nuts by the NCA and their proposals were ruined, in my opinion. And so there is no good to come from good consultation, because the NCA will just go, up you, Jack, and do what they want done.
Thank you. You've made me feel less cynical than somebody else in the room. All right, are we done? Okay, I'm closing the meeting. I'd like to introduce the new chair of the North Canberra Community Council.